Hello, YouTube. My name is Robaer Washington. You're here with the Robaer Report. This is a new show, Black USA News. Um, Today we'll be interviewing and is a sociologist from Mississippi, and his name is Dr. Melvin C. Ray. Doc has an extensive career path. Born in Arkansas, and he'll explain more about that with you. In Mississippi, moved around to different places in exploring his sociological career path. He worked as a farm worker. He worked in the wood mill. Actually worked as a prison on death row. In his professional life, he transitioned to a research assistant, a teaching assistant, a visiting assistant professor for Cornell College, assistant professor and program coordinator for the Mississippi Crime and Justice Center. He worked for the Mississippi Crime and Justice Center as a coordinator, as an associate vice president for research, interim vice president for research, as well as the special assistant to three consecutive chancellors and presidents at the historic Mississippi State University in Starkville, Mississippi. He also worked as the associate vice president for economic development and awarded the emeritus status at both the Associate Vice President for Economic Development as well as the Associate Professor of Sociology level. He's written dozens of referee journal articles as a sociologist. He's written book chapters, and he has published two books, of which we will discuss today. He has traveled extensively throughout Africa, Asia, Europe, South America, and North America in his research engagements. YouTube, welcome Dr. Melvin C. Ray. You may proceed, Dr. Melvin C. Ray. How are you, sir?
Wonderfully well, Mr. Washington. Let me first thank you for having me on this evening.
A slight delay. Okay, so Dr. Ray, as I'm your extensive background, let us know a little bit about yourself. Where you from? I believe when we talked earlier, you say you were from Arkansas. How did you make that transition what was the transition from Arkansas to Mississippi for you? How did that?
Well, as you stated, I was born in the Arkansas Delta on a plantation named Pickens, Arkansas. My parents were sharecroppers. So we did every type of farm labor that you can think of, including chopping cotton, picking cotton, hooking beans, shoveling rice paddies. I went from there watching cars go down US Highway 65 during the heat of the summer. And I saw these cars traveling, and the people had all the windows up in the car, and it was hot. We were out in the fields right beside the highway. And I said one day I was going to have me a car that during the summertime in the heat, I could ride around with my windows up. So the motivation for me to excel in school was to one day have me a car that had air conditioning. But I worked hard.
Okay.
And I worked hard, and I got a partial scholarship to the historic University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. It was formerly AM&N, the historical Black college and university, where I was mentored by a number of professors, and they had a great deal of faith in me. But it was the placement officer who came to me one day and said, "Melvin, what are you going to do once you graduate?" Now, I was working at the prison, at Arkansas Commons Prison. My role was on death row. So I was a death row correctional officer. And so we fed and kept secured all the maximum security prisoners. So I thought I had a pretty good gig going on. And, I had a little car, a little apartment. But this placement officer said, "Melvin, you have the potential to go to graduate school. And there are graduate schools around the country who will pay you just as much as you're making working a full-time job as a prison guard." I didn't believe him at first, but he told me that he would contact one of his friends at Iowa State University. He did so. That person contacted me, and they flew me up to Iowa. That's the first time I'd ever been on a plane. They flew me up to Iowa. I visited Iowa State at Ames, Iowa, agreed to attend school there. My initial thing, my degree at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff was in industrial psychology. So I wanted to pursue a degree in psychology, but we all have a plan, purpose, and place through a divine guidance. So I went to Iowa State. The psychology department said, no, my GRE wasn't high enough. The sociology department said, we'll look at him. We'll give him a try. So I went over to sociology. They awarded me a research assistantship, and the rest is history. I fell in love with sociology. I had taken sociology courses prior to that at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, but it was when I attended graduate school and earned my master's degree where I really learned what sociology was all about. And I fell in love with it, being able to track the interactions between individuals as well as society as a whole. It gave me the framework for me to understand how society can impact the individual. And as a collective, individuals can impact society. Within sociology, I focus on crime and delinquency. Some would call it criminology. So what I was interested in doing is trying to figure out why people commit crimes. So doing my master's degree, I focused on criminology and drugs and alcohol. When I earned my master's degree, I was getting ready back to Arkansas. Faculty members at Iowa University told me that I couldn't really get a job with a master's degree, that I had the potential to earn a PhD. So they lobbied me to stay on and earn a PhD at Iowa State University, and I did so. I majored in crime, delinquency, or criminology. Was able to publish several research articles as a graduate student, and then was recruited by Cornell College to come and serve as a visiting assistant professor my first year out. And that was a great experience. Cornell College is a highly regarded private liberal arts college there in Iowa. And I enjoyed it thoroughly. After that, I was recruited by Mississippi State University. And that would bring me back closer to my aging parents. But Mississippi State University also offered me a very competitive package at the time, back in 1987. So I turned them down a couple of times. I'm not bragging, but they were persistent. And I finally agreed to come and visit Mississippi State, visit the campus, and just actually was very impressed with the people, the facilities, and those types of things. And so I stayed there. Had the opportunity to leave, but I stayed there for almost 30 years. I retired in 2014. And if you want me to, I can go in just the list. You've already listed sort of the positions I held at Mississippi State. But I will say again that everybody has a plan, purpose, and place through divine guidance. But at Mississippi State, I was able to accomplish several things. And again, in the Deep South, Mississippi State, a major research, historically white university, I went in as assistant professor and quickly rose to a program coordinator, an academic program. I was over the corrections program, corrections and criminal justice. I had over 100 students, undergraduate level, and I produced probably 10 to 12 doctoral students, people now with PhDs all over the world. I mean, I had students from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, just all over the world, and a lot of domestic students. But they are out there now doing well. I quickly rose through the research ranks and was promoted to the coordinator of the Mississippi Crime and Justice Unit. We were able to bring in millions of dollars over time to that research unit. After that, I was recruited to apply for the Associate Vice President for Research. I did that, was successful. Unfortunately, our Vice President for Research passed away one Thanksgiving, and the president called me up and offered me interim Vice President for Research. I served in that capacity for 2 years. Following that, a new president came in and offered me the position of special assistant to the president. So I served
Okay.
3 of those. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
I will say again.
Okay.
Uh, would you like for me to continue? I believe we've lost the audio.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mr. Washington, can you hear me?
Okay. Wow.
So, can you hear me?
Okay.
I think we're having audio difficulties. I cannot hear your question.
That's right. Okay.
Mr. Washington?
Okay.
Mr. Washington, can you hear me?
Sorry about working for research. That being over here with this man, so known first part hear you with you to your chat with race. Yeah,
We're having audio difficulties. Can you hear me? Mr. Washington. Mr. Washington.
okay. All right. You hear me now?
I hear you now.
Okay, great. All right. So I was going into your the books that you've written. Uh, the first book, Why College Degrees Still Matter. I was showing it to the audience. Can you hear me now, Dr. Ray?
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah, I was showing your book, Why College Degrees Still Matter, to the audience, as well as I was going to show you. I also showed uh, an introduction to America's rigged democratic system and systemic racism. All right, you've had an extensive background in traveling different states, as I mentioned within different throughout different countries. Um, with your book, Why College Degrees Still Matter. Give us a brief synopsis of it, as well as what was the background on creating that book with your co-author.
Yeah, the co-author is Dr. Tommy Stevenson, and he and I were colleagues at Mississippi State University. And he and I had similar experiences, grew up in rural areas, and now we were at a major research university where everything was based on scholarships were based on ACT scores. And a lot of the African American students, as it is across the nation, were coming in with ACT composite scores around 18 or 21 and so forth. And but we knew that institutions use that ACT to predict success. Moreover, that ACT determined if and how much scholarship students would receive. So what we were finding was that while our African American students were not scoring high in general on the ACT score, a lot of them were doing very well in the classroom, but they
Okay.
were missing out on those scholarship dollars. So what we were interested in trying to find out is, could we identify social and behavioral factors that were related to academic success among African American college students? And the title of the book came from what we thought was the purpose of a college education. We know and we understand that a college education does not make a person, any better than anyone else. But we do know that a college education opens doors. It gives people an introduction to be looked at for potential jobs, occupation, and careers. More importantly,
Okay.
what we found was that the college degrees allowed students that when they graduated, they could become even more active members of their communities. One of the things we looked at when we served on committees um, at the university, in the city, and around the country is that mostly everybody who served on those committees had college degrees. So
Okay.
we reasoned that a college degree was the entry point for you being selected to serve on committees and councils at local, state, federal, and national levels. So our
Okay.
argument was, if you want to be fully engaged and have even more opportunities to be engaged in your community, one of the things you ought to consider is getting a college degree. Because
Okay.
let's face it, when those meetings occur in the morning or mid afternoon, a person who's on an hourly, getting paid by the hour, is not going to take off work to go sit in a committee meeting.
That's
But a
right.
person, but a person who's salaried, and most of those will have a college degree behind their names, can take off just about any time if they can justify the time that they're taking off that is being dedicated to community service. So
Okay.
we started looking at those types of things. We also looked at, of course, the average annual income of college degree people versus others, and we found that, of course, it was greater. Uh, Lifelong satisfaction was greater. So that's why we said college degrees still matter. And we wrote that book during a time when a lot of state legislatures were saying that what all students need to be doing was going to community colleges, 2-year community college. And we value 2-year community college. We value trades and skills and those types of things. But we also wanted to make the statements that a 4-year college degree still mattered, and above, master's and PhD still matter. And they
Okay.
do give you a leg up. So that was the impetus behind the book. So we designed and conducted a study of over 1,200 African American college students, and we were able to identify those factors, those variables that were related to higher GPAs.
Okay. Okay. Good. Okay. All right. That is a great answer to for educators who are interested in a topic like this of how they can advance their own platforms to talk to young people or other educators about the importance of a college degree. I appreciate that. What I did was I put the link into the chat so that those who are interested in your work, they can go to the link. It's an Amazon link that I put in for why college degrees still matter, success strategies. And so you also have a second book. This book is an introduction to America's rigged democratic system and systemic racism. Could you give some historical context to what was going on with you as well as society when you decided to write this book?
Well, yes, that's a great question, Mr. Washington, and thank you for it. What what was going on is I've been a student of history, in particular Black history, looking at it from a macro as well as a micro levels. And what I found was that every society, its culture is characterized by systems. So in the U.S., we have systems that make up our society, make up our government. But what happened was during the 2016 uh, elections, I heard candidate Donald Trump say to African Americans, "What do you have to lose? The system is rigged." He said our schools were no good, we didn't have jobs, and the system was rigged. Now that's what the candidate Donald Trump said, and that really piqued my interest because later I listened to former Speaker Newt Gingrich said that in talking with some of his Black friends, he found that most white people don't understand what Black folks go through in the U.S. Now that's a quote, and that quote is cited in my book in the source. All these things were cited in the book, so I got sources for everything that's in the book. So my objective was to trace the history of different systems in the U.S. from 1619 to the present, and try to trace the development of race relations in each one of those systems.
Okay.
A lot of times when people talk about systemic racism, they will only focus on one system, for instance, the criminal justice system.
Okay.
My framework in the book says you have to look at the connection between the education system, the political system, the health system, and the criminal justice system, communication systems. You have to take from a holistic perspective and look at how all of those systems play a part in promulgating and sustaining systemic racism.
Okay.
So if you start off with religion, in the book, I talk about how the church was instrumental, okay, in the beginning of the colonialization of Africa, for instance. Okay. So the church has been thoroughly involved and engaged in the beginning and the sustaining of slavery.
Okay.
So you have to look at that, and then you have to look at the different scriptures within, for instance, and people don't like to hear this, but it's documented in the book. You can look at different scriptures in the Bible and understand why certain people thought what they were doing in terms of enslaving black folks was the right thing to do.
Okay.
Okay. Now, but then you take that and you go to the political system and you start looking at how it was designed. It was designed for whites only, primarily white men.
Okay.
It excluded black folks and women. So the Constitution was never meant to bring about equality. So you start looking at that, and then the Constitution lays for how laws are developed and who those laws are applied to. You move from the political center and system, and you go to the business and economic system. From day one, black folks were excluded from the business enterprise. We couldn't own businesses. We couldn't even own animals.
Right.
All right. We start tracking the development of business, the business enterprise, entrepreneurship. And for some people, they say, well, why isn't there more black businesses and entrepreneurs? Well, if you track it from history, you'll find out that the U.S. Agriculture Department just settled a lawsuit, the Black Farmers lawsuit, because they denied black folks loans and other means of support that they were giving other people. And we lost a tremendous amount of land. All this is documented in the book. Then you go to the communication system and you look at the news and you see how black folk, particularly black men, are the lead story on most national broadcasts when they talk about crime. Right. And they're the ending story when they talk about sports.
Wow.
So the average person who watched the local news every day would say, well, what are black folks known for? Well, opening segments on crime.
Okay.
The ending segment is on sports.
Wow.
All right. So, but you go and you start looking, you would say, well, that means that African Americans must have really done well in the sports arena. But then when you read the book, you find, as players, we succeeded against all odds. But as owners of teams, as coaches of teams, there's only, in terms of different sports, we are not there in any significant number. But we can be the best in all the positions. But when it comes down to coaching others, instructing others, it seems like the system says we're not capable. Wow. But all that's documented in the book. We talk about home ownership, and we find out that over the years, realtors and banks discriminated against black folks, so we couldn't buy homes. They wouldn't loan us money in certain neighborhoods to renovate our homes, to drive up the equity and the value of our homes. So again, you just start looking at how all these things are interwoven together, and you start saying, well, what do people do when scriptures can be interpreted to say that they ought to be slaves? When you look at the law and you find that the laws are applied to black folks differently. When you look at the government, you look at gerrymandering, you look at communications and you see how we are portrayed. You look at business and industry and you look at our employment. Well, and I'm not justifying or legitimizing crime and delinquency, but Robert K. Merton developed his theory, his anomaly theory, where he says that if opportunities to pursue legal means are limited and are blocked, people will find other means to achieve set aspects of the American dream. I believe that.
Wow.
I
Okay.
believe that in this society, we tell people their success is based on partially their material possessions, their careers, their employment status, and those types of
That's
things.
right.
But at the same time, we know that systems have been put in place that have limited or blocked a lot of African Americans from achieving those aspects of the American dream. So you
That's
ask the
right.
question. Everyone should ask the question: if those avenues are blocked or severely limited, what will some people do? Okay, and
Okay.
and I think that's where you find that in very poor, poverty-stricken area, regardless of race or ethnicity, and that's what's important for us to realize. Regardless of race and ethnicity, you look at poverty-stricken areas, and you're going to have higher crime rates. But you also must understand of the fact that in poverty areas, you have greater law enforcement surveillance.
That's right.
If you look for crime, you're going to find crime. So, but again, my point is in the book is let's look at every system we got in the U.S. and trace its effects on African Americans over time. And for us not to get so focused on one system. Again, often everyone wants to focus on the criminal justice system. But there's some other system feeding into that system. And I
Okay.
talk about the criminal justice system in the sense of bail. You got people who locked up in jail because they can afford bail.
Hey, Dr. Ray, we got about a minute and a half left. I want you to continue, but we got about a minute and a half.
Okay. Well, but the book, so the impetus for the book was listening to a presidential candidate tell black folks that, voting for that what did we have to lose by voting for him because the system hadn't worked for us anyway. Okay. So I had to go back and start this research to find out what was he talking about. I mean, frankly, when I hear white politicians talk about how African Americans have been treated, but they don't detail clearly exactly what they're talking about, it leaves me in a mystical state because I'm thinking, I hear what you're saying, but you're not explaining to me what you mean. And what I tried to do in the book is to say the next time you hear someone say the system's rigged, I want you to be able to go to that book and look at every system in the U.S. and say, okay, I understand how it is rigged and how it leads and perpetuates systemic racism.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Ray, this has been a powerful, action-packed, well, I won't say action-packed, we're just sitting, but this has been a powerful 30 minutes of you explaining how you came into being a sociologist and then how you took those tools and used those tools and shaped them into two books. One you co-authored with between yourself and Dr. Tommy Stevenson, and then one you decided to write yourself. An introduction to America's rigged democratic system and systemic racism. Dr. Ray, we're going to have you back on the show to do a more of a deep dive into these topics that you've written about. But once again, I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And have a good day, Facebook and YouTube. Signing off. This is the Robaer Report. Take care.